Hello to niggas and niggas only. This is your boy Marquise Davon, this American Negro, but don't ever call me Mark, please and thank you. Today, if you can't tell by my shirt, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into Beyonce's Renaissance album, which everybody should be listening to at this point in time. I'm going to be very honest.
Hey yo, fuego!
So I'm gonna go through this album, one as a fan, one I'm gonna get into my dramaturgy bag, so I'll be just analyzing the world of the album, and then I'm gonna really just have some fun with it, to be honest. I wanted to do more videos that kind of encapsulate the pop culture stuff that I love, but also the intellectual side of it. And Beyonce is somebody who I think allows me to dig in and pull things out that maybe somebody who might not have a background knowledge um, may not catch these little nuances, and the general ear might not catch these little pieces. So I'm gonna analyze it as a fan, but then also as a critic. Before we get into all of that, though, welcome to This American Negro. This is a show where I talk around culture, politics, vulnerability, and the essence of the human, because I would love to push blackness and push the culture and push our people to really think in a more comprehensive way, but also just inspire them to just be better in whatever that looks like for them. So yes, welcome back to the show, and let's get into it. All right, so first and foremost, it's been 6 years of a solo Beyonce project that we've all been waiting for. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed Everything Is Love, Homecoming, and also The Gift, which is still a phenomenal album, by the way. But I am so happy to see a solo Beyonce album with very minimum features that she used very smart, which I was super excited about. But this is just a feel good album. Like I know my title says I ran that joint up 138 times plus some, because that first weekend jumped at least 90 to 100 at that point. So I knew once she dropped, it was over for every other artist that I was listening to, whether local or not. I said, yikes. Woo! But when she dropped, she dropped. So I was here for it the entire time. And I knew we were going to get something that dealt with more dance, something that was a little bit more escapist. I knew it was going to be an opportunity for us to just feel rather than think, because we've been sitting with self this entire time. So what does it mean to go from being up here, which is what 2016 to 2022 was really forcing us to do, especially with the racial uprisings, especially with the pandemic, sitting with ourselves, altering relationships, all of this stuff was just shifting in this 6 years of how we interact with ourselves and others, community, and the larger culture as a whole. So when we got to sit down and I heard this album, I was just, all right, let's get into it. And Beyonce comes out and she is just talking her stuff, like really just fully into it. And it was so exciting because I was just like, wow, this music is here. And it really, honestly, it put every other album to shame that came out this year, but also it is a good argument to be one of Beyonce's best albums, cohesively, thematically, sound-wise, lyrically. It has all just been super, super dope. So I'm only just imagining what this looks like when she brings out the visuals into it as well. So just as a fan, she gamified our experience as we were experiencing this rollout, but then also she allowed us to really just indulge into being a fan of her and what she does. So I am so thrilled and so excited to really get into the nuances of this album. So let's get into it. So when we're thinking about Renaissance, as soon as I heard the name, I said, oh, it's culture, it's literature, it is thinking, it is experimentation, it is a revival of art, it is a revival of an idea. And then for it to also be, as we enter the new 2020s, the 100 years from the Harlem Renaissance, that's also was a time that was an intellectual and cultural shift for us as a people. So the Harlem Renaissance, that gave us people like the Baldwins of the world. That gave us people like Lorraine Hansberry. That gave us people like so many more out there. I was like blanking on these names for a little bit. I was like Lorraine Hansberry, Langston Hughes, Baldwin. You get the Nina Simones. You get Sam Cooks. Like all of these people are intellectuals. All of these people are literary masters. These people are musicians. These people are indulging in politics, in social movements, all of these things. You think about the idea of the new Negro. What does it mean to live into this space? But it's also a time that came right after World War One. Like that's also, I think, important to note when you think about when we choose escapism. It is after something tumultuous has happened, and we have to go through this whole existential crisis of like, who are we as a nation? Who are we as a people? Who are we as a person? And I think that's so important because it allows space for us to really deconstruct who we are and really tell a story and really be able to do this through our art, which we see historically a lot of the time. And so I was so interested to see how art was going to shift due to the pandemic and due to the social uprisings. And I'm noticing the trend of when it comes to Black men and our art, it's very much so, let's go back into self, let's reevaluate who I am as a person, as opposed to where Black women and Black femmes are really leaning into this. Let's celebrate who we are because we've been surviving this entire time, despite all of these things that are going on around us, the world, the war, our people, the violence, all of these things. But what does it mean to celebrate self and also know that you're going to come back out on top, right? And I think that's what Beyoncé was able to really tap into. I really, really believe that she is an artist who reflects the time periods, and we're going to see that way after she is gone. In 4, as the world is going into like this idea of electropop and all of this stuff, she was like, well, I was still on my foundation of like R&B, right? Self-titled. That was a really big time where feminism was coming up to the forefront once again. And really people were leaning into it, learning the language, repopularizing it. And so when she was like, got the Chimamanda speech, they were just like, oh, we know where this is at. But I think it's important because it was a reclamation of self. It was a reclamation of womanhood. It was her lean into feminism and more explicitly leaning into that feminism, especially after she became a mother. Then you go into Lemonade, which is much more of the Black feminism, womanism, and restoration and redemption and that sense of self as you go through this journey, specifically the journey as a Black woman. Black is King. You lean into a little bit more of like, yo, how do I prevent this and how do I expel this love into our community? How do I expel this love into our children, into our people, to really understand that we are these divine beings? But then to get something further, like Renaissance is an album that affirms those that were underground. Renaissance is also a callback to disco, to house, to dance music, to ballroom culture. And when you're thinking around all of these things that are together, now all of these symbolically represent rebellion. All of these were inspired by Black queer folks the entire time. And then also, what would it mean to escape the world that oppresses us every single day? What does it mean to be in community with people who simply get it? And I know this is safe, and I know that these people are going to have my back no matter what. But we also get to celebrate this identity that the rest of the world does not celebrate, right? That's indicative of Black people. That's indicative of Black queer people, Black women. What do these affinity spaces start to look like? And what does it mean for me to build on top of that by also remixing the art that we've already had, by remixing the stuff and making it to the forefront? So when you think about these specifically in Chicago, these house music became something because of the underground, and this DJ did what he needed to do and brought that up, right? Which I think is super important to note because remember, queerness, Blackness, a lot of this stuff was in the underground. We could not talk about it in public because it made the greater world uncomfortable, and it could also mean danger for us to really express how we feel, whether that is through art and entertainment, because that is still dangerous, right? We need to understand the social political aspect of this to really understand what it meant for somebody like a Zora Neale Hurston to have the audacity to write something like Their Eyes Were Watching God, to have something like James Baldwin talk about the fire next time, or Go Tell It on a Mountain. What were the things that needed to happen in order for art and social movements to coincide? And I think right now, especially as we're thinking about art, overall, if we're looking at comedy, Gerard Carmichael, and you see these little nuances in other videos that I've already created, right? If you're looking at P Valley, that's putting queerness on display. That's putting women on display. And it's also just not from the idea of like, oh, this is how a man desires the world. This is how a man digests this person or this being. Now, I'm gonna flip that and let you know, what does it look like from our perspective? What does it look like from a perspective that is not the dominant force, but we're getting shows like Legendary. We're getting more queer representation on television in our community overall. And the language is pervasive throughout everything. It's giving. Santana, who else? Rolling Ray. All of these people are moving to the forefront in terms of language, culture, the way that people are talking, the way that people interact, those designers that people are wearing, everything is there. And so what does it mean for us to have to reckon with, oh, we got to see queer Black folks all in this space and acknowledge it rather than passively adopting this culture? I think Beyonce did a very smart move of being able to take Renaissance and one, put all of this stuff on display, and took it a step further of just like, let me also let you know that this is a full story. Let me let you know that this is an ode to my Uncle Johnny, to those that passed away during the HIV and AIDS epidemic, the crack epidemic. Let me also make sure that these stories are no longer erased the way that we did some of our Black greats, the way that we did so many queer folks that will never have their story told. Beyonce used this as an opportunity to really immortalize those in the Black LGBTQ plus community. Wow, I swear I got this. We're good. But also she used the inspiration of her Uncle Johnny. She used the inspiration of like, what does it mean for us to celebrate unapologetically? What does it mean for us to do all of that within this music and force everybody to have to dance to it, right? I'm dancing, I'm moving, I'm singing along. This is just feels good. And it's an album steeped in affirmations, affirmations of self, affirmations of protection, affirmations of community, affirmations of a people, right? Which is where it goes into me even thinking about this from a narrative perspective. I'm just like, all right, Lemonade had a very clear through line of the story that it was telling, right? But Renaissance is also telling a story, but I put it as Renaissance A side and Renaissance B side, or if she wants to put it, Renaissance Act 1 versus Renaissance Act 2 within, well, 1A and 1B, right? So really get into it. The first 6 songs just about, when you're thinking about I'm that girl, affirmation, cozy within my skin, alien superstar, I'm one of one, I'm the only one, right? I feel like falling in love. I want to be reckless. I want to just indulge in self. All of these things, right? When you go through those first couple songs, you're like, oh, she's talking about self. This is me. This is who she is. So one, Beyonce talking about it. This is who she is now, declaring it, having that confidence. I imagine her talking to herself in the mirror, but not yet quite outside just yet, because the world's not ready for that just yet, right? And then she gains that confidence when you get to by the time you get to Break My Soul. Break My Soul is like, this, I did everything I needed to do. People are gonna take it how it is, but just know you're not gonna break my soul. So we break it down from there, which then leads us into Church Girl, which I think is the shift in the album. So once Church Girl happens, now it is dealing with the duality to live in that audacity. Oh, you thought just because I was a church girl on Sunday did not mean that I had the opportunity to just go out and do what I need to do, right? And that's the cool part when you think about the Renaissance, because it added nuance to Black existence. It added nuance to who we are as a people. Yeah, I'll make sure my family's good, Yeah, I'm gonna go out and be this provider, but also me indulging in some fun may not look like what it looks like for you. I don't always have to keep up this image of who you think I am to be, which is still reminiscent of Beyonce. Because we look at Beyonce and we look at her as this leader who has to have all the answers, as this person who has to represent the culture, who has to understand every single political nuance because she is such a massive person. But what does it mean for her to simply have fun and indulge, right? Because we saw her get dragged so much for wanting to just want to do good. And everybody taking these missteps and being like, oh, but not like that. Oh, but not like that. Oh, now you got blood diamonds. Oh, well, I mean, you didn't really represent Africa, and nobody should be calling you Mother Africa. Which some of these are valid critiques, right? They are very valid, and I think they are also one-dimensional in terms of how we approach criticism, which I'll talk about in a different video. But I think our approach to criticism has lost the nuance that we believe it has today because it feels so regular, and oftentimes it doesn't feel like it's coming from a space of like, hey, I want you to grow, or hey, what can you learn from this? It's coming from a space of like, let me deconstruct and deconstruct, but never leave room to reconstruct. And I think that's the part of the criticism and feedback that I don't think enough of us are able to really delve into a lot, right? So I think Church Girl is a perfect space to really just be like, well, look, I'm gonna still be at church and I'm gonna be twerking on the weekends, but as long as I'm not hurting anybody, everybody else should just mind their business, right? So I think that's what the turning point of the album is, because you get into something like Move. This means this person or Beyoncé, whoever we want to use, is actually coming into self. And now they are now entering the world. Church Girl represented the judgment that they are going to face. Move allowed the opportunity for everybody to be like, oh, wait, who's that girl? Right? Tem's saying it. Who's that girl in the back of the room? There is noticings there. People are paying attention to who she is. People pay attention to Beyonce. Once again, I'm paralleling a coming of age story, and specifically like a Black queer coming of age story versus a Beyonce's own story. That's what I'm doing here right now. Let's move that over. Plastic on the Sofa into Virgo's Groove. This is very much so like, I understand the world, and like I'm pulling out certain lyrics, right? The world's gonna be hard on you. I want these moments for us to just love each other unconditionally, unapologetically, to be together. When we are together, the rest of the world does not matter. Because just know I'm always going to be here and I will just see you. Right? Which then leads outside of that, because you now have your community, you have your people, you have your person who sees you for who you are. Okay? And I can see you in that tenderness, because there's who I am, and then who I am when I'm outside and the world is showing me who I have to be. And I think it's more so like the I versus the me. So what people place on you, so the socialized version of yourself, and then who am I as a whole? That's super important to recognize in this duality of this album, because in the second part, she's really pushing against that me aspect of who they say I am supposed to be, the socialized version of myself. They don't like that, because that can be protection, but Heated, Thick, both of these tracks are, let me actually talk my shit real quick. Let me actually just remind you of what's going on here. Let me actually just read you down for a little bit, because the end of Heated, that last minute, right? One day I'm overrated, Tuesday on my, She knew what she was doing in that moment, which I think was also a nice little callback to Bow Down, because when she was just angry and tired of people just talking, now Beyonce is very, very much so aware and moving with the audacity to let you know, I know exactly what y'all are saying about me. I know the expectation that you have of me, and the way that one day y'all are going to be flipping on me, but then at the same time still streaming my stuff. So at this point, where it makes me think about like, what does this criticism start to look like? It makes me think about even within our community, because let's be clear, Richard Wright didn't bang with Zora Neale Hurston. He criticized her for putting that kind of Black woman on display, for writing about it in that way, because you said, oh wait, that is not a woman that represents a community. Wait, you're also using AAVE? No, we got to make sure we show the most polished and perfect version of ourselves, so this way they have no opportunity to critique us as such. And I'm not alone with that talented 10 stuff. Y'all know I am the Zora Neale Hurston stan. I love that woman. She is great. Okay? But it's really making me think about like this duality that we have to live in with the Renaissance and putting yourself out on display and what that means. You even takes me to a further idea of I don't remember who said it, but to be visibly queer means to put your happiness and joy over fear. So what does it mean for Beyonce to do something like this? You lean into the rest of this album, we are fully in a ball. We are fully worried about like, I am on your mind all the time. I am now your topic of discussion. And because I'm that topic of discussion, you need to deal with me in a very particular kind of way that may not be comfortable for you. at all. So now you have to reassess why you feel how you feel. Now you have to reassess exactly what this means for you. That's the genius of Renaissance. Because even those who move in a space of criticism, those who understand the political and social implications of Beyonce, the entity, I think that sometimes we live in this space of like, well, she can't do this and this can't happen and this needs to be this and she needs to say it just like this and this is what this means, right? I don't think that's fair all the time. Um, and I think with Renaissance, this came at the time where we get to dissect art in a different way. We get to see what does it mean to explore all parts of humanity. Because even in the criticisms around, well, Beyonce's focused too much on escapism and not enough on having a political message, which is what a lot of these comments were. And at that point, I said, not y'all grasping for straws. We don't like that over here, right? It's a little ghetto. But I think it is something to completely say around how Beyonce is able to move. Beyonce is able to have a very particular message when she is sending this stuff out. And I think it's an opportunity for people to simply feel. I think Beyonce, yeah, I listened to the lyrics and yes, I probably just created that narrative in my mind around this being a coming of age story that parallels with Beyonce's career. But I really think that it was something for specifically like an ode to her Uncle Johnny, right? A man who loved her and Solange unconditionally. He opened them up to so many new things. He represented somebody that wasn't the norm for the public imagination. And so to have somebody who is creating an ode to a family member like this is so important because we talk around like representation, we talk about erasure, we talk around all of this stuff. This revival of disco, of ballroom, of all of this stuff that was traditionally underground and then also looked at as like, oh, we don't want that over here because this is, y'all indulging in self too much. Y'all like self too much. You should be worried about what's going on around the rest of the world, right? But I think she did something perfectly here of being able to move something to the forefront. I think Beyonce is a very intellectual artist. I think she's a very intentional artist. I think she is somebody that we need to ensure that when she is saying something, it's important that we know what she is talking about. She wanted to be part of this fabric of what did it mean to come out of this time, a super rough time for Black people specifically, right? All Black people specifically. And so I think there's a space where, yeah, not everybody's going to get the album. People are going to look at it like as an experimental piece. But I think Beyonce made a very great statement without having to say much, without having to be explicitly political, in a way that's still comfortable. And people really, it's going to be hard to criticize an album that makes you feel so good. It's going to be hard to criticize an album that doesn't have a political through line throughout the entire space. That's hard to do, right? And so I think Beyonce was very specific on how she did this because these last couple of albums were met with a certain level of controversy and criticism that felt unfair, that felt like it was very much so in one space to criticize, and it negated such an important piece of art that pushed humanity, right? It's so interesting to me now that Black is King had a very, very similar affirming message, right? She used the same model for Black is King for Renaissance. Oh, let me actually steep this in, which she took the approach from African cultures, right? Various African cultures from the continent, and was like, let me reaffirm this because this will still be the root. This is still where we all come from. Let's make sure that there is still a beauty here and flip over this narrative. She did the same thing with Renaissance, but she just made sure that it was something I think closer to Black American culture. I think she focused a little bit more on like, well, I know my people, so let me focus on my people. That's also super important to hear, important to see, because I think that's the comfort spot. Lemonade, Black American. Homecoming, Black American. Renaissance, Black American. So I think there's something to say that there's safety in maybe not always a Pan-African approach that we need. Maybe Beyonce is somebody who can just exist with self and with our own Black American spaces, right? Because going beyond that requires a level of nuance and a level of responsibility that everybody else is going to place onto her. that I don't know is always fair, considering she's not an explicit political person. You know, somebody who's in here pushing policy. She'll let us know like here's the base of what this is. But I think Renaissance allows her to just be her embrace her full humanity and embrace a fun side that I think we all need and that we deserve, and still reminding us like, oh, but you're also going to make sure you're taking care of these people who are erased. Um, yeah. So I actually didn't plan that last part, in terms of like just speaking on Renaissance. But as I was talking, I was like, well, yeah, she does use a very similar model. And so I would love to just know your thoughts in terms of like, what do you think the intention behind the album was? Do you agree with me in terms of like, this is a personal narrative of like a queer coming of age story and Beyonce's own story of like, I can shed perfection and just be. Um, and just overall, I just want to know y'all, what is y'all order of the album tracks? Because I've seen some real trash things and I'm curious. I'm probably going to revisit this once I see the visuals. Also, I think somebody like Kimberly Foster is going to absolutely do some amazing stuff because she just has an art history brain in something else. And so I'm just like, I'm excited to see what they're doing. And then I'll also link some of the articles that I really enjoyed reading from Eva Ani and also Angera Perkins. I think they also encompassed a lot of really cool stuff. And Wesley Morris did what he needed to do in that New York Times article as well. So I just want to make sure that I'm also giving space to those creators and those writers who did some really cool work that I appreciated. Let me know how you feel about it. Don't forget, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you like what I had to say here, please make sure you leave a comment. Also, if you're watching this on Spotify, make sure to also subscribe to my Spotify and also make sure to share this out with those that you're listening to, because nothing's better than hearing I was referred to this from a friend of a friend of a friend. Other than that, this is This American Negro. This is Marquise, never Mark. And on that note, peace.